Hi everyone and welcome back to another Brilliant Games. In today's episode, we'll be covering a World Championship match between Mr. Bobby Fischer, which was one of the greatest players of the 20th century, and Boris Spassky, a very strong Russian player. So let's get into it. C4. So Mr. Bobby Fischer is playing white and Mr. Spassky is playing black. And Bobby Fischer starts with c4, and this is a surprise because Bobby was always an e4 guy, along with his famous best by test quote referring to e4. Spassky had tons of experience playing against this c4 move, the English, while Fischer didn't. e6, knight f3, d5, d4, knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, and bishop g5. By transposition, this is now turned into the Queen's Gambit declined. Castles, e3, h6, bishop h4, and b6. Spassky had only lost once from this position and used it against other top grandmasters. On the other hand, Bobby had never played the Queen's Gambit in any type of tournament play, so this was looking quite good for Spassky in the opening. cd5, knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, knight takes, and pawn takes. Rook to c1, and bishop to e6. Well, you might ask, if black played b6, why doesn't he fianchetto his bishop and put it to b7? Why does he bring it to e6? Well, this is actually standard in what we call the Tartakower variation of the Queen's Gambit declined. Just because black played b6 doesn't mean he has to put his bishop there. It could be better placed elsewhere, so black will put it there. In this case, e6 is better placed than b7, because the bishop will have no future staring at their own pawn. Bishop e6, queen a4, queen a3, rook c8, and bishop to b5. This is an interesting idea by Bobby Fischer. Black doesn't want to trade this knight for this bishop, so this move tries to restrict black's development. However, in the end, black doesn't really have any real problems, but it's an interesting try by Bobby Fischer. a6, g takes c5, and pawn takes c5. Now, this is an instructive moment. These two pawns, the c pawn and the d pawn, are called hanging pawns. It's a very special type of pawn structure. Hanging pawns aren't actually hanging, you can't actually take them. They're just two pawns on adjacent files with no pawns next to them. In this case, there is no black b pawn, there is no black e pawn, so these two pawns are called hanging pawns. The player with the hanging pawns, in this case Boris Spassky, and his pieces will be more active than Miss Bobby Fischer's. He can use the rooks down the b file, and he can use the rooks down the e file. However, what Fischer wants to do is he wants to trade more pieces so these pawns become weak and immobile and he can win them. Now what happens if, you might ask, what happens if Boris Spassky takes the rook? Well, now, after just castle, this pawn is now isolated, and this is more of a weakness for black, as white can try to win it in the future. Then I can take on a8, and if rook takes b5, then I can take on e7. So now back to the game. After castles, he plays rook to a7, a slight inaccuracy. A more accurate move would be instead queen to a7 instead here. And after bishop e2, knight d7, rook c3, and a5, black is counterplay down the b file. Again, thanks to the hanging pawns, because the b file is now open. After rook a7, Bobby Fischer plays bishop back to e2. And now you notice black's pawns are very exposed, so he will have trouble keeping them safe. Knight to d7, knight to d4. This is knight wants to take on e6. You can't take this knight because of this, and also you can take the queen. Queen to f8, and now knight takes e6, takes, and now a brilliant positional move by Bobby Fischer. e4, attacking black's pawns and giving black a choice of rotten strategic options. If you take here, then look at these pawns. These pawns aren't going anywhere. They are garbage. These two are isolated. This one is isolated. This one's also isolated. And these two are also doubled. So e4 is a great move. And Boris responds with d4. However, this move has been criticized because it leaves black with immobile pawns, and they get weaker and weaker. However, other options are also pretty bad, so d4 is fine. f4, queen e7, and now e5, a good move, controlling key squares, allowing the bishop to move to some good squares like c4, e4, and f3, and also controlling some, and also allowing white to play around black's passed d pawn. Rook to b8, bishop c4. The bishop is very well placed here. King h8, queen e6, and knight f8. And now b3, solidifying the position. Now Spassky plays an interesting move, a5. He's trying to use the a pawn as a battering ram to create some counterplay. And now Fischer doesn't care about this small distraction. He goes for the kill with f5. After takes and takes, Fischer has opened the f file, and this e pawn is passed. Oops. Let's go back. f4 here. And now, after f5, you have to take, because f6 would be devastating. So takes, knight h7, and rook cf1, staying patient. If you were to play the move rook f7 and thinking, I'm so smart, I'm going to win the rook in the corner, well, actually, you lose, so knight to g5. This knight attacks the queen and the rook simultaneously. If you take this queen, then the knight takes with check, forcing you to take back, and then black wins the rook and is winning. Let's say, so in the real game, Fischer played a good move, staying patient. Queen back to d8, and queen to g3, improving the queen, rook e7, and h4. You see, in the previous position, the knight could come to g5 and pose some problems for white, so h4 stops the knight infiltration. Rook bb7, and now e6, restricting the black rooks even further. Rook b to c7, and queen to e5. Queen to e8, and look at black's position. It's absolutely miserable. The pawns are weak and immobile, the pieces are all stuck and passive, and on the other hand, look at white's position. Rooks on down the file, queen centralized, bishop wonderfully placed, and a strong passed e-pawn. It looks like Fischer is in complete control of this game. But how will he convert this? Well, this is how. He first plays a4. You see, when you're in a superior position and all your opponent's pieces are tied up, you don't want to allow any counterplay. You don't want to rush. In fact, there is no need to rush because you have all the time in the world. a4, stopping any a4 idea by black himself to create some play. Queen d8, and now all black can do is shuffle. Rook here, a little bit of shuffling to gain time on the clock. Bishop back to d3, lining up over here. Queen slides back, a battery down this diagonal, and now knight to f6, trying to plug the hole, trying to defend the king. A desperate effort by Boris Spassky, but here, in the words of Gotham Chess, Bobby Fischer says, I guess I'll sacrifice the rook! Because after gf6 and rook f6, these three angry pieces are staring directly at this king, and there's no escape from the pieces. King to g8, and now a great move, bishop to c4, lining up this diagonal. And if the rook were to move away, then e7 check is devastating. King to h8, and queen to f4. And this is absolutely devastating move, because now you can take on h6, you can come down to f8 and win the queen. There's simply too much threats, and in this position, Boris Spassky resigned. Well, I would say this was an absolutely brilliant positional and strategical game by Mr. Bobby Fischer. He's first to strike with e4, understanding that these pawns need to be cracked apart. And after Black immobilizes pawns, the deadly kingside march. F4, E5, bringing the pieces to the king, consolidating, and especially this position. Look at this position. White is dominating. Black is completely paralyzed. And this cool, calm, collected move, A4, shutting everything down. And now there's no counterplay. And Black soon fell to a tactical display with Rook takes F6. So I would say this is an absolutely brilliant game from Bobby Fischer. I'll see you next time.